Not all goodness is born of the pure heart. Sometimes it arises from despair, from loneliness that corrodes the soul like rust on metal. In the territory of Wyoming, where the biting wind carries secrets that no man should know, the simplest choices can change the fate of many lives. Thomas Mackenzie built his life away from others, on a small ranch, surrounded by mountains that touched the clouds. 42 years of existence had etched deep wrinkles around his blue eyes, marks left by the relentless sun of summers and the biting cold of winters. His grey beard grew wild, as did his soul, shaped by years of voluntary isolation. Mackenzie chose that place precisely because of the distance he kept from everything and everyone. His house was 2 days' ride from the nearest city. Winter came early in that year of 1874. Snow began to fall in late October, covering the land with a white blanket that transformed the known world into a strange and silent place. Mackenzie knew that annual ritual well. Nature was preparing to test the endurance of all living things. He had stocked up on 3 months' sufficient firewood, dried meat for the same period, and his 2 horses had safe shelter in the stable he had built himself out of pine logs. On the morning of November 3rd, when the cold bit like wolf's teeth, Mackenzie went out to check his traps near the creek that ran behind his property. The ice had formed a thin crust over the flowing water, and its footsteps were rattling in the compacted snow. It was a familiar sound, comforting in a way, but when he got close to the 3rd trap, his ears picked up something different, a faint cry, almost muffled by the snow that kept falling. Mackenzie stopped and pricked his ears. The sound came from a small elevation covered by frozen bushes. He walked in the direction of the crying, his steps cautious, not knowing what he would find. As he brushed aside the ice-covered branches, his eyes were faced with a sight that would change his life forever. One native baby, no more than 6 months old, was wrapped in buffalo skins already hardened by the cold. The child cried in a voice that sounded like a desperate whisper, his little clenched fists trying to find warmth that no longer existed. Around the baby, footprints already almost erased by fresh snow told a story that Mackenzie managed to read like an open book. A woman had run around carrying the child. His footprints showed haste, desperation perhaps. At one point, she had tripped and fallen. Mackenzie saw the marks in the snow. After that, only her footprints continued farther and farther away until they completely disappeared into the darkness of the forest. The mother had hidden her son there, probably hoping to return. But the storm that lasted 3 days did not give anyone that chance. Mackenzie picked up the baby carefully, feeling how the small body shivered with cold. The child stopped crying as soon as he felt the human warmth, his dark eyes fixed on the bearded face of the man who found him. At that moment, something moved inside Mackenzie's chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced in many years. Maybe it was compassion. Maybe it was the distant memory of when he himself had been a father. The drive back home seemed longer than usual. Mackenzie kept the baby close to her chest, trying to pass on as much warmth as possible to that little being who depended completely on him now. When he arrived at the ranch, the first thing he did was light the fire in the fireplace and heat goat's milk he had saved. I didn't know much about taking care of babies, but necessity taught me quickly. All that night, Mackenzie didn't sleep. He sat in the wooden chair by the fireplace, watching the child he had placed in a box lined with his own softer shirts. The baby slept soundly, finally warmed and fed. For the first time in many years, Mackenzie didn't feel alone in his own home. He could not know, as he fed that child lost in the storm, that from the top of the mountains, watchful eyes watched the smoke coming from the chimney of his house. He could not imagine that his decision to save a life had put his own in danger. The dawn would bring consequences that not even his wildest imagination could foresee. The snow continued to fall throughout the night, covering the footprints that led to his door, erasing the traces of what had happened the day before. But some marks cannot be erased by snow, especially those etched into the hearts of parents who have lost their children in the white vastness of the unforgiving winter. The dawn came as quiet as ever, but unlike any other Mackenzie had witnessed in his years of loneliness. The golden sunlight filtered through the thick curtains of his hut, illuminating the sleeping face of the child, who now rested on a makeshift bed made of soft blankets. The baby breathed easy, his little fists relaxed, finally warmed after the terrible night he had spent in the open. Mackenzie rose slowly from the chair where she had spent the entire night, her bones protesting the waking hours. 42 years of hard life had taken their toll, but that morning he felt a different energy coursing through his veins. For the first time in a long time, it had a purpose beyond simply surviving. He walked to the window and pulled back the curtain slightly to look at the world outside. The storm had ceased during the early hours of the morning, leaving behind a transformed scenery. The snow covered everything in an even layer almost half a meter high, and the pine trees looked like white giants silhouetted against the clear blue sky. It was a spectacle of wild beauty that Mackenzie enjoyed, but that morning something else caught his eye. Smoke. Several thin columns of smoke rising from the distant mountains, forming signals that he could not decipher, but that his instinct recognized as communication. Mackenzie had lived long enough in those lands to know that the natives used smoke to communicate across great distances. Normally, this would not worry him. The tribes of the region maintained a relationship of mutual respect with the few settlers who, like him, preferred the solitude of the mountains. The baby began to move, making small sounds that indicated hunger. Mackenzie stepped away from the window and went to prepare more warm milk, a task she was learning to do with care and patience. As she heated the liquid in the wood stove, her thoughts drifted back to the woman who had left the child hidden in the bushes. Where would she be now? Had she been able to find shelter somewhere, or had the storm taken another life in that unforgiving winter? During the years of isolation, Mackenzie had developed a strict routine that kept him busy from dawn to dusk. Taking care of the animals, checking the traps, cutting wood, repairing anything that needed repair. But that day, his routine was completely changed by the presence of the little child who now depended on him. After feeding the baby, Mackenzie wrapped him in warm blankets and placed him in a box by the fireplace. He needed to go out to take care of his horses and check that the animals had made it through the storm well. The stable was only 50 yards from the house. But even then, he hesitated before leaving. It was the first time in many years that he had worried about leaving someone alone, even for a few minutes. The horses were fine, just restless from the storm of the night before. Mackenzie gave them fresh hay and checked to make sure they had enough water. His two four-legged companions, a sorrel named Rusty and a black mare named Belle, were hardy animals, accustomed to the rigors of that climate. They had been his only companions for the past 5 years, and he knew every one of their habits and moods. When she returned home, she found the baby awake, watching the flames of the fireplace with curious eyes. It was amazing how this small child had managed to survive the cold of the night before. There was a strength in it that Mackenzie recognized, the same determination to live that he had seen in wild animals, and that he himself carried within himself. The day passed peacefully, punctuated only by the baby's basic needs and essential household chores. Mackenzie found that caring for a child was more work than she had imagined, but also more rewarding. Every smile, every movement of the little arms, every curious look was like an unexpected gift in a life that had become accustomed to the monotony of loneliness. As the sun began to set, painting the sky orange and red, Mackenzie noticed movement in the distant mountains, dark dots moving against the white snow, too arranged to be wild animals. He took the binoculars he kept in a drawer and focused on the direction of movement. Nights. Many riders descended the mountain trails, following a formation that he recognized as being from a group in search of something or someone. Even from a distance, Mackenzie could see that these were mounted natives. probably from the tribe that inhabited the highlands during the winter. His stomach tightened in a sensation he hadn't experienced in a long time. Genuine fear. Not fear of dying, for that had ceased to worry him years ago, but fear of the consequences of his actions. He looked at the baby, who was sleeping peacefully by the fireplace, and understood that his decision to save that life had put both of them in a delicate situation. Night fell quickly, as it always did in the mountains during the winter. Mackenzie lit only one lamp, keeping the house dimly lit so as not to attract attention. He knew that the horsemen he had seen were approaching, and that they would probably arrive at his ranch before dawn. As she watched the baby sleep, Mackenzie reflected on the choices she had made in life. Some had taken him away from civilization, into that solitude he had embraced as a refuge. Others, like the decision to save that child, were about to bring the world back to his doorstep in a way he wasn't prepared to face. The dawn brought with it a different silence, loaded with expectation and tension. Mackenzie hadn't been able to sleep for a minute, his ears attentive to every sound coming from outside. The wind had stopped completely, leaving the world in absolute stillness that amplified any noise, no matter how small. He knew that this kind of silence often preceded storms or major events. The first lights of dawn had barely touched the mountain peaks when Mackenzie heard what he expected and feared at the same time, the muffled sound of hooves in the snow. Many hulls. He got up from his chair carefully so as not to wake the baby and walked to the window, pushing away only a small crack in the curtain to look outside. What he saw made his heart race at a pace he hadn't experienced in many years. Dozens of knights emerged from the morning mist as silent ghosts, their mounts moving with precision and discipline through the deep snow. They came from the mountains in organized groups, converging on their ranch like rivers meeting in a valley. Mackenzie began to mentally count as more and more knights appeared in his line of sight. 50, 70, 100. He stopped counting when he noticed that they kept coming, forming a wide semicircle around his property, keeping a respectful but clearly strategic distance. I had never seen so many native warriors gathered in one place, and I certainly had never been the focus of such attention. The leader of the group stood out from the rest, not only for his position at the front, but for the imposing presence that radiated even from a distance. Mounted on a magnificent pinto horse, he wore a simple but elegant headdress, and his clothes showed the signs of someone accustomed to leading other men through difficult situations. Most importantly, Mackenzie noticed that the man did not carry weapons in his hands. His arms were crossed over his chest in a posture that suggested waiting, not immediate threat. The other warriors followed their leader's example, keeping their weapons guarded but clearly visible. Feather-decorated spears and tribal paintings stood erect next to their horses. Bows remained attached to their backs, and some firearms, rifles obtained through bartering or other means, rested through their saddles. It was an impressive show of force, but controlled, organized. Mackenzie immediately understood what was happening. Those men had not come for an unbridled invasion. They had come to get something, or someone. Her eyes turned to the baby, who was still sleeping peacefully by the fireplace, oblivious to the drama unfolding around him. The child he had saved from certain death in the snow was clearly important to these people, perhaps much more important than he had imagined. The leader of the warriors made a subtle gesture with his right hand, and all the knights stopped right where they were. The discipline shown by these men impressed Mackenzie. They were experienced warriors, accustomed to obeying orders without question. After a few moments of waiting, the leader dismounted from his horse with fluid movements and walked a few steps in the direction of the cabin, stopping at a distance that still allowed conversation but showed respect for Mackenzie's property. It was obvious that they expected some kind of response or gesture from Mackenzie. They knew he was inside. They probably also knew he had the child with him. The smoke coming out of the chimney and the tracks around the house told the story clearly to anyone who knew how to read the signs of nature. Mackenzie looked again at the baby, who had begun to move slightly, indicating that he would soon wake up and need to be fed again. A part of him simply wanted to take the child, leave the house, and deliver the baby to his people. It would be the simplest choice, the safest choice for everyone involved. But another part of him, a part that he didn't know still existed, refused to accept this easy solution. During the 2 days he had taken care of that child, something had changed inside him. For the first time in many years, he had felt needed, useful to someone other than himself. The baby had brought warmth to a home that had been cold for too long, had brought purpose to a life that had become just a matter of passing the days one after the other. He knew that those men outside had every right to claim the child. It was a matter of family, blood, culture, but he also knew that the baby had been abandoned to die in the storm, and that he had been the one who had saved it. That gave him some right in the situation, or so he wanted to believe. The baby opened his eyes and looked directly at Mackenzie, as if he felt the tension hanging in the air. Her small arms reached out toward the man who had become her protector, and Mackenzie felt her heart tighten in a way she hadn't experienced in decades. Outside, the warriors continued to wait with infinite patience. Mackenzie knew that this wait would not last forever. Soon he would have to make a decision that would change his life forever, and possibly determine the fate of many other people. The morning was just beginning, but he already felt that it would be the most important day of his existence. The hours passed like centuries on that morning of silent tension. Mackenzie fed the baby as he watched through the window, as the warriors stood motionless in their positions, like bronze statues silhouetted against the white snow. The leader continued to stand next to his mount, his arms crossed, demonstrating a patience that seemed infinite. It was clear that these men were prepared to wait as long as it took. The sun rose slowly into the clear sky, melting some of the snow from the rooftops and creating small waterfalls that dripped at a steady pace. That normally comforting sound now marked every second of a situation that Mackenzie knew he couldn't prolong indefinitely. The baby had become more active during the morning, playing with Mackenzie's fingers and smiling in a way that warmed the lonely man's heart. Around noon, something changed in the posture of the leader of the warriors. He turned slightly and made an almost imperceptible gesture with his head. Immediately, a smaller figure detached himself from the group of horsemen and began to walk in the direction of the hut. It was a woman, Mackenzie realized, dressed in traditional clothes decorated with colorful beads, her long hair braided with leather ribbons. The woman stopped a few feet from the door of the hut and stood there, her hands empty and visible, in a posture that showed no threat. Mackenzie could see tears running down her face even from a distance. She didn't need words to understand who she was and what she was feeling, a mother looking for her son. Mackenzie looked at the baby in her arms and felt a tightness in her chest that almost left him breathless. For the first time since he had found the child, he fully understood the magnitude of what was happening. This wasn't just a matter of saving a life. It was a family issue, of a desperate mother who had lost her son in a terrible storm and was now there, waiting to find out if he was still alive. The woman took a few more steps toward the cabin, her tears now falling openly. She raised one hand in a kind of gesture of supplication, and Mackenzie saw in that movement all the pain of a mother who had been separated from her child by the cruelest circumstances that nature could impose. He got up from the chair where he was sitting, the baby still in his arms, and walked to the door. His hand hesitated for a moment on the latch, knowing that opening that door would mean changing everything, probably forever. But when he looked again at the woman's face through the small window next to the entrance, his decision was made not by reason, but by his heart. Mackenzie opened the door slowly, cold morning air pouring into the heated cabin. The woman stopped breathing for a moment when she saw the baby in the arms of the bearded man. His eyes filled with such intense joy that Mackenzie felt as if he were witnessing a miracle. The child, recognizing his mother's voice even after days of separation, began to move anxiously in Mackenzie's arms. Speechless, because words were not needed at that moment, Mackenzie took a few steps in the direction of the woman. She stretched out her arms, shivering not from cold, but from pure emotion, and Mackenzie gently placed the baby back in the arms of its real mother. The moment mother and son were reunited was something Mackenzie knew she would remember for the rest of her life. The woman held her son to her chest, whispering words in her native language that Mackenzie didn't understand, but whose meaning was universal. They were words of relief, gratitude, unconditional love. She looked at Mackenzie with eyes that sparkled with tears and bowed her head in respectful bow, a gesture that said more than any words could express. Mackenzie waved back, feeling a strange emptiness in the arms that had held this child for 3 full days. But it was a good void, he realized, the void that remains when we do the right thing even if it costs us something precious. For the first time in many years, he felt proud of a decision he had made. The woman walked back toward the warriors, carrying her recovered child. The leader got off his horse again and went to meet her, and Mackenzie saw in his gestures the same joy and relief that he had seen in his mother's face. He was probably the father of the child, Mackenzie realized, and perhaps also the leader of those warriors who had risked so much to recover a lost member of their family. What happened next completely surprised Mackenzie. Instead of simply leaving with the recovered child, the warriors began to organize themselves in a different way. Some dismounted from their horses and began unloading objects that Mackenzie could not identify from a distance. It was as if they were preparing to stay there for a while, not to leave immediately as he had hoped. The leader looked in Mackenzie's direction and made a hand gesture, a move that clearly meant a respectful summons. It was obvious that they wanted to talk to him, that there were more things to be resolved than the simple return of the child. Mackenzie hesitated for a moment, but then left the cabin and began to walk toward the group, prepared to find out what else this extraordinary day had in store for him. What Mackenzie discovered as he approached the group changed his understanding of everything that had happened in the past few days. The objects that the warriors had unloaded from their horses were not weapons or war supplies, but gifts. Blankets woven with intricate patterns, baskets filled with jerky, perfectly tanned hides, and other items that represented wealth and respect in their culture. The leader of the warriors approached Mackenzie with firm but respectful steps. When they were face to face, the man placed his right hand over his heart and bowed deeply. It was such a sincere gesture of gratitude that Mackenzie felt his eyes moisten. This man, who could have taken the child by force with his 150 warriors, was there showing gratitude for the kindness of a stranger. Other members of the group approached, bringing the gifts they had prepared. One of the older women handed Mackenzie a beautiful blanket, woven with colors reminiscent of the sunset in the mountains. His wrinkled hands touched Mackenzie's for a moment, and he understood that this blanket had been made by someone important to her, probably a daughter or granddaughter. Over the next hour, in a quiet but deeply meaningful ceremony, Mackenzie received more gifts than she could carry. Each item was accompanied by respectful gestures and looks of genuine gratitude. He realized that he had done more than save a child. He had created a bridge between two worlds that rarely met at peace. The baby, now back in his mother's arms, seemed to realize the importance of the moment. His small eyes moved between Mackenzie and the people of his people, as if he knew he had been the link that united everyone there. The mother approached Mackenzie one last time, held his hand, and pressed something small into his palm, a bone-hewn amulet, probably a protection or blessing. As the sun began to decline, the warriors began to prepare to leave. They arranged the gifts on the balcony of Mackenzie's cabin, creating a small mountain of riches that would transform his simple life. But the most valuable gift wasn't something material. It was the sense of purpose and connection that Mackenzie had forgotten it was possible to feel. The leader of the warriors mounted his horse and looked one last time at Mackenzie. His eyes communicated a clear message, that lonely white man would always be welcome in his lands. He would always be considered a friend. It was an honor that few colonists had received, and Mackenzie understood the magnitude of what was being offered. One by one, the warriors mounted their horses and began to move away. The mother with her baby was the last to leave, waving softly to Mackenzie before disappearing onto the trail leading back to the mountains. Within minutes, the ranch was back to silence, but it was a silence different from what Mackenzie knew. It was a silence filled with peace and satisfaction. That night, sitting in his chair by the fireplace, Mackenzie looked at the gifts he had received and felt a deep gratitude for having made the right decision. For 3 days, he had fathered a child that was not his own, and this experience had awakened in him a humanity he thought he had lost forever. In the years that followed, Mackenzie never felt completely alone again. The gifts he had received not only improved his material life, but reminded him daily that sometimes a simple act of kindness can change not only a life, but the destiny of many people. And on winter nights, when the wind blew hard through the mountains, Mackenzie would sometimes hear the distant echo of native drums and know that somewhere in the highlands, a child was growing up healthy and loved, carrying with him the story of a lonely man who chose to save a life when he could have simply gone his way. If this Wild West story touched your heart, leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more exciting adventures like Mackenzie's.